everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Korea This Week, and I'm your host, Sang Kim. Today, we have my colleague Kyle Ferrier, who is Director of Academic Affairs and Research at KEI. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, so we do have many things to talk about, and one of them is being another missile launch of some kind from North Korea. So that happened on last Thursday. So let's talk a little bit about that. So, not this Saturday, but last Saturday, it was North Korea said it was part of a strike drill or like some sort of a military exercise, and that's why they launched a couple of projectiles. But after 5 days or so, they launched another missile of some kind.
Right.
So what do we know, and how is this different than the first one?
Well, what do we know depends on who you're listening to. Right. Some people in South Korea still don't think that it's a ballistic missile test, which would violate the UNSC sanctions, but some people in the U.S. think that this is actually a short-range ballistic missile technology that's being highlighted here. So there are differing storylines, and we'll have to see how they converge as we find out more information. At least the South Koreans have more time to explore what the missile was. And it actually flew longer and higher than the previous test, so there is speculation that this was done to show that that this missile could reach all of the Korean peninsula, sort of more of a direct messaging at South Korea, which has actually gotten some people more riled up in South Korea. Moon, particularly his base, there are people on the left who are very concerned about this missile test because of the messaging that it sends to South Korea. It may not violate the UNSC, United Nations Security Council sanctions, if it's not a ballistic missile, but at the same time, it sort of cuts against the grain of what the South Koreans and the North Koreans had agreed to in the Pyongyang Declaration in terms of sort of working to lessen the antagonistic relationship between the two countries and calm tensions between the two of them. So this can kind of seen as people in South Korea, particularly among Moon's base, have sort of viewed this more negatively than the U.S. has, and President Trump has actually sort of taken a wait-and-see attitude. There were some initial reports that he was fuming initially, but it seems as if the cooler heads have prevailed, and he said, we'll wait and see what happens.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit more of President Trump's response. So he recently had an interview with Politico that mentioned the missile test, and like you said, he was very calm about it. What was his formal statement from
they're short range. I don't consider that a breach at all. They're very standard stuff. And North Korea, the DoD had said they flight tested multiple ballistic missiles. But essentially for Trump, he's trying to tamp down speculation as to how provocative these are, because this falls within a larger administration messaging that we're still on track for talks with North Korea. So he has this incentive to sort of not hype things up, but at the same time, it's sort of the reaction in the U.S. and reaction among some in South Korea highlight the differences of the objectives of the two countries. Whereas, the U.S. seems to be very much more concerned about these long-range missiles, whereas we're treaty allies with South Korea and Japan. If either of them were to be attacked by short-range missiles, the U.S. would be obliged to help defend those countries. So either way, the U.S. would get involved. So there should be concern about these short-range missiles, but I think that not escalating concerns to a level that would throw off potential for the reemergence of talks, re-engagement between the United States and North Korea, is essentially the right path to tread right now, at least.
Right. So even though both U.S. and South Korea, and also Japan too, because it's short-range missiles too, they're all concerned about the missile launches, but obviously they don't want to go back to end of 2017 where the hostile language were exchanged, and that was basically escalating tension.
Right.
But what's interesting about the missile launch is that some experts say that it's the North Korean version of the Russian ballistic missiles, and that also means that North Korea is modernizing its missile program and not really stopping their missile program, which is continuously threatening its allies. And this morning, the Ministry of Defense announced during the briefing that they are strengthening its military defense program, which is interesting. They're projecting that even though President Moon Jae-in is willing to talk to North Korea and talk through diplomacy and stuff, but they're still willing to up their military defense.
Right, and the missile testing, or at least demonstrating short-range capabilities, isn't necessarily against what the U.S. and North Korea have been talking about. They're trying to focus more on the ICBMs and the nuclear side of things. So building up these short-range capabilities is continuously a threat to South Korea, particularly. Right. So it makes sense, from the North Korean perspective, if they're not using ballistic missile technology, which by many accounts it seems as if they are, but to take the South Korean side, if they're not, it presents this conventional challenge on the peninsula. So the Moon arguing to build up the missile defense in South Korea follows a larger trend in the past year or two, where he's been trying to build up his own military defense capabilities, which the North Koreans haven't taken too kindly to, but it's still it's an effort by the Moon administration to modernize and to upgrade their own defense forces.
Absolutely, and they're trying to build their own missile defense too, not too much relying on the U.S. military program. So while the missile launches and hopefully not back to the hostile environment, there's another humanitarian side to North Korean issue right now. You probably heard a lot of it on the news. So the UN World Food Program recently released a report that they conducted assessment on the food shortage in North Korea, and according to that, it's getting worse, and there's particularly worse this year because of the combination of drought, flooding, and a worst harvest in a decade. So could you tell us a little bit about that and how countries are responding to it?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, food production is, according to the numbers that the WFP, the World Food Program has put out, it seems as if the North Korean food situation is deteriorating, and the WFP is looking to recruit. You're trying to find donors to give food aid to North Korea, and Trump last week came out and said he wouldn't prevent the South Koreans from going ahead and moving forward with their own food aid program, and the South Koreans had came out just very recently saying that they were going to plan to send food aid to North Korea. They're exploring those options. The Russians sent, I think it was like 50,000 metric tons earlier this year. But the real key issue when it comes to the food aid is the verification processes. Anything when we talk about the nuclear weapons program or food aid, verification, oversight is a very strong sticking point for the North Koreans. For us, we would like, and for other potential international aid donors we would all like to have strong oversight to see where this food is going, not going directed towards the government, but towards the masses of people. The 40%, the 40% that the WFP say are malnourished or undernourished, and that's sort of been a sticking point in discussions before with giving food aid to North Korea. So it'll be whether there's also this wide range of views as to how necessarily bad the food situation is, and I think from an absolute perspective, just looking at the numbers themselves, yes, it's bad, but comparatively, there's room to argue. I think depending on how bad the situation is based off of numbers from recent years.
Right. The executive director of the World Food Program recently visited Korea and met with President Moon and also the Ministry of Unification Minister to talk about South Korea's willingness to provide aid to North Korea as well. And what's interesting is that South Korea is still willing to provide food to North Korea directly, in addition to following the international organization and routes. So, but the Ministry of Unification said that they will only provide aid to North Korea after establishing a national consensus. So that probably means, making sure that not everyone, but majority of people in South Korea agree with it. And then also there's a National Assembly, which you mentioned with divided views it might be tough, a little tough.
I think that's an understatement, yeah.
Especially given the current situation with the missile test and if North Korea continues this provocation. So we will see. We'll have to see, as with a lot of things related to North Korea, how this process moves forward. Obviously, separate from the provocation and the North Korean regime, there are people starving, especially women and children who are suffering. So hopefully we can find ways to provide the nutrition and food and medical aid also to those that are in need.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you like to mention for this week? Anything we should watch out for?
I think we hit on all the main points I wanted to talk on.
Yeah, I think so too. So those are the main news that you'll be hearing on the news a lot this week. So thank you, Kyle, for joining us and sharing your insights. And we'll be back next Monday at 2 p.m. as always. And thanks so much for watching. Bye.